brings us to our conversation today, the amazing Suma Reddy. She's not only an amazing founder, CEO, co-founder and CEO of Future Acres, which is an amazing company. I can't wait to get into the meat of this, but also a really good friend of mine. She's been we've been connected for many, many years, and I've seen her work at and co-found and create so many different types of companies. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Welcome everybody into the environment, and then ask Suma. It's good to see everybody's faces. Now that I'm not sharing my screen, I can see everybody here. And Suma, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and give us a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll get right into the conversation.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Love what, Andy and New York Tech Alliance represent. So yeah, quick introduction. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Future Acres. We're building sustainable and advanced and intelligent robotic tools for farms. So this is my third company at the intersection of climate and ag tech. Prior to that, built a company in indoor farming. Prior to that, organic waste to energy. So this industry has become very close to my heart over time.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you so much, Suma. It's so good to see you. And I've seen you. I think we had your last company demo at New York Tech Meetup about 2 years ago, called Farm Shelf. So it's also in this kind of ag tech space. And then I know that you've had a previous experience in this, like you said, climate and agriculture space. So to get the conversation started, I would love to hear a little bit. Actually, I'm going to pause right there and say, again, welcome everybody in the room. During the conversation, if you have any questions for Suma or myself, please feel free to put them into the chat and we'll get them answered. And also, if you'd like to share your contact information and be contacted by Suma or myself, please include that in the chat as well. Okay, so I forgot that little housekeeping piece at the beginning, but now we'll get right to the conversation. So, agriculture, climate tech, it's a really big growing industry. And, we talk a lot about how technology is going to impact the future of a lot of these businesses. I wanted, before we get into the deep conversation about what you're building now, I would love to hear kind of how you kind of fell into that realm, what interested you in that, and what led you down that path of starting to go into and focusing in that area.
In that sector, yeah, I think it's a combination of just like by accident, serendipity, and intention. So my first gig was actually in Mali in the Peace Corps, and so I think at that time in my life, I was really, just thinking about access and opportunity, understanding my place in the world, right? And so just moved to Mali for 2 years, really to kind of experience, of course, from a privileged American perspective, that life. And so I worked right in a village, so agriculture was a huge part of that, life there, right? And post that, jumped over to India, where I worked at a microfinance company. It was a nonprofit that converted to a for-profit, was giving loans to many smallholder farmers, 100% women, for assets like cows, chickens, goats, things like that. So once again, I was sort of understanding sort of that element. And one of the core pieces of like their success was actually creating a database, just a database of members. And eventually that company IPO'd and it was sold for a couple $2 billion. So it was my first experience at a high growth startup. So I think I was just starting to, think about this layering, right, of impact and technology, and what could it mean? And when I graduated from business school in 2009, I it was a really good time to kind of jump into renewable energy. I don't think we really called it climate back then. Obama was giving a lot of different types of incentives to develop utility scale energy projects. And so my cousin, who had more experience with me on that front, asked me to join in starting a fund that was investing in these greenfield projects. And so solar, small hydro, and anaerobic digestion got really like interested in really learning about the technological pieces. And then I also realized, right, at that stage in my life, you know, investing was not exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to build, I wanted to operate. And so my uncle was actually building India's first and largest sugarcane waste to compress natural gas facility. So it's just basically taking this waste stream and turning it into renewable energy, plus this sort of organic, nutrient-rich digestate or fertilizer. So it could be used on the farms again, right? And kind of a closed loop process. So insanely hard project to get up and running, but really good when you thought of like environment and impact and community and things like that. So because of that, the first company I founded in the US was really looking at these solutions. So, and then it just kind of followed me, for the next decade where I think Andy knows I have, pivoted in different directions, but hard tech seemed to have found me. And I'm really blessed to be part of sort of this industrial project and hardware community, and then climate and agriculture and food systems in general.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I definitely appreciate that background. I think when I think about you as a founder and as a community member, I do think of you as kind of the creator and the operator and a hardware expert in a way, and it's just really great to see. Like, having been connected to you for so long, just really great to see how you're putting all of those things to use and the different types of projects that you focused on to create that. I think one of the first projects that we talked about, you were just teaching yourself how to code as well, right? Like you went through the Flatiron School to learn how to code, and then you created this app called Waddle. Is that right?
Yeah, Waddle. So, and I don't talk about it too much in my story, but I think there is sort of this food system and DEI piece to it. And so, yeah, I taught myself to code because I was suffering from massive imposter syndrome once I decided to jump into tech, right? Like renewable energy wasn't tech. I was trying to jump into sort of this like what Silicon Valley was talking about. And so I learned UX design, learned iOS, really honestly because of imposter syndrome, and to check those boxes. And so Waddle, what it ended up becoming, and I can only say this in hindsight, was, we know by 2050, right? Like the demographics of our population is going to change, right? And content, sort of curated content for communities, right? Whether you're South Asian or queer or BIPOC, right? I think has become a lot more important. We see that on Netflix, right? We see that in movies and we see that in writing. And so what Waddle ended up being was actually a very queer, very BIPOC centered way in which to give reviews to your friends about places to go through storytelling. And so it was a short-lived project. I think my co-founder and cousin tragically passed away when he was 25. So kind of put that project to bed. But I still have the website app because I think it's my dream to somehow kickstart that again in some way, in some capacity.
Well, I bring it up just because it's a very different from what you were doing before. It's very different from what you're doing now, and it really I did feel the strength in the community there, and I really love that aspect of the product. And I think it's an important characteristic of how I think about you as well as such a leader in the community and a connector within the communities. So I just wanted to bring that up because it was my first exposure to you, and it was such a great way to get connected and to see the types of products that you're creating. And then once you moved on from Model, you've worked on so many different kind of hardware specific types of products. And I think it would be really interesting to start to talk about that a little bit. And it's kind of like, how are you bringing, um, there was that very community centric piece, and then you're focusing on hardware. And I've seen you kind of connect a lot of that together as you've moved through your career. So I would love to talk about that hardware piece, and kind of like, how did you get into focusing on hardware? Like, what is it that fascinates you about building hardware? And then kind of, how did you overcome some of those challenges that you encountered?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, again, it wasn't 100% purposeful. I think that I was, always just fascinated more by physical products and physical manifestations of entrepreneurship. And, that led me to hard tech. And, one project, prior to even Farm Shelf. So Farm Shelf was an indoor farming company. And I think, that intersection of community and hardware has been really important for a couple of reasons. I think for Farm Shelf, so Farm Shelf is selling, bookshelf size indoor farms. When I was there, it was for corporate cafeterias and restaurants, and it's currently trying to pivot to consumer. And decently complex product, right? LEDs, right? Lots of glass, lots of sheet metal, 5 different types of injection molded parts, right? And so one of the most awesome challenges for me was really learning the manufacturing piece of it, because we didn't have a head of manufacturing. And so got to meet incredible people. Actually, one guy, Jim Grisbacher, who's on the call, who ended up being essentially like part of the team, but really sort of these advisors on so many pieces of the business, because I didn't have experience, say, in like embedded electronics, for example, or I didn't know what an injection molded piece of plastic was, right? Or an extruder or things like that. So just intellectually, it's been awesome, right? To think about, how you bring hard tech into reality.
That's amazing. And I have to say that I've always been a little fearful about learning more about hardware and hard tech, because it's so complex. And but it's incredibly interesting to see how all of these integrated systems work together to create the experience. And I'm just amazed at the founders that can start to create businesses around that. And I know how complex and difficult that can be, challenging that can be. And that brings us to your current business, Future Acres. So I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit about Future Acres and kind of where you're at in the cycle, and how the development of the product is going.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, for me personally, it was a story of being outdoor agriculture, indoor agriculture, and going back to outdoor agriculture. And I think the majority of our food, going forward, will be grown outdoors. Indoor is important, but I think there's a lot of massive challenges with outdoors. So, with Future Acres, we're really looking at, building these sustainable, advanced, and intelligent robotic tools for farms. And the massive challenge that we think about is this: by 2050, we'll reach 10 billion people, where we'll need to increase our food production by 50%, using the same exact amount of land, and reduce emissions by 75%. So it's a really astronomical challenge when you think of it from a societal level. And for us, when we talk to farms, one of the first things they say as a challenge is, workers, right? And this is a really complex topic, and I'm happy to go into it. But right, if this was an investor pitch, I would just say labor shortage, right? And we can get into the systemic issues, right? I think that's really important to talk through so that we actually look at things with some depth. But just for simplicity, right, in California, we're saying with 20% worker shortage in some farms, and exacerbated by an aging workforce, which is declining 7% a year, right? And that is, yes, in part to sort of our policies, right, around migration and immigration, but also because this is really tough work, and these farm worker kids don't want to do this work, understandably, and sort of these inefficient tools. So the first problem set that we decided we wanted to tackle was something that we felt was something we could tackle, right? Which is, so for example, a table grape farm will spend 30% of their time and energy transporting those grapes by wheelbarrow post picking. And so that's 2 hours a day using a technology that was invented in 231, CE AD in China. So we're like, opportunity here, right? So that's where we kind of jumped in and said, let's figure out, at this stage, a solution around the transport. Let's solve that. And so the product itself is sort of an autonomous harvest companion, a smart wheelbarrow, equipped and loaded with load sensors, things like that, and a scheduler. So we're building these kind of personalized fleet management solutions for farm, while also building an AI and data platform to capture what you can imagine you can capture, right? If you have a roving ground robot, right, and a smart wheelbarrow, you can get yield, you can get location, you can get timestamps, and in the future, you can do really cool stuff around crop quality and health and things like that.
Yeah, and you're focusing on a delicate crop, right? Like these are crops that are that have to be harvested by hand, and they tend to be a little bit more fragile. So, can you speak about why you started with kind of table grapes?
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on it exactly. When you look at specialty crops like our fruits, our nuts, horticulture, and fruits specifically, they are delicate crops, and so the cost of production, because you need a lot more manual touch, right, that is 2 to 3 times higher than other industries. And so, if you have a row crop, you're not transporting that by wheelbarrow, right? You just kind of get these like combine thrashers, right? And that's fine. But because this is something that still is a very manual process, we're starting with table grapes, one, primarily because of that, and two, 99% of table grapes are grown in one state, in California. So it's just an incredible captive market in which to launch a business.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I have two directions that we can go in. I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions from the audience at this point. But there's two really interesting points that you've brought up. One is the one about the labor shortage and kind of talking about some of that impact and how it's impacting the development of your product. Or we can talk about the development of the product and kind of building an autonomous vehicle and robotics. So maybe we'll start there and just talk about the product itself and kind of how was the idea created? What kind of systems are you working with to create the product? And then we can move into kind of how the experience of the farm worker is impacting the design of the product itself.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of the idea, that actually came pretty much from our founding farm partner, HMC Farms. I am not a farmer, right? So for me, this is not an idea that I could just come up with, or the venture studio I'm part of. So, one, just simple product design is asking your users what they want. And so they're like, yep, this is a huge piece of our challenge today. And farms are frankly terrified, right, of what's going to happen in the future. Today, the New York Times released an article about new laws, thankfully, and regulations, because it's going to impact how labor and agricultural workers and outdoor workers work in an era of climate change. And we already saw that this year, in California, especially, right? The drought, smoke, everything like that. You can't work 8 hours a day. Like, you won't be able to work 8 hours a day in the fields anymore. And so what does that actually mean? So, sorry, to get down to product, so our kind of technology, the systems that we think about is the actual robot itself. So how do we design a robot that's robust and can work in the field and autonomously travel through the field? So embedding features like obstacle detection, right? So it doesn't just run into you if you're in the field, right? Something like that. and then, making sure that whatever equipment we put in that robot doesn't melt. That actually did happen when we were first prototyping, and we're still sort of, in an early stage where things melted in the California sun. The
Wow.
second piece of it, yeah, which is wild. So it's real, like it's very real, and it's a whole different type of challenge than you would think of for, say, Amazon warehouse robotics, right? Which are very
Right.
sanitized. And so how do you apply a lot of those methodologies to an industry like ours? The second piece is what we call the Smart Wheelbarrow. And it's just basically a wheelbarrow that's retrofitted with sensors so that, say, a farm worker has done the harvesting and put the grapes on the wheelbarrow. When it hits that 180 pound, 150-pound limit, it automatically alerts the carry robot through what we call the scheduler. So that's sort of the predictive platform piece. And so, I mean, that's been really important too, because we've been able to embed data analytics into it, because all of a sudden we can measure things like yield per location, yield per time. And this is data that farms have never had. Our HMC, once said to me, we're making 7-figure decisions literally based on sort of intuition and maybe in what we see in past years. Right? It's these decisions are not based on data. And so that's the change they want to make, right, as farms. So yeah, so I think that's another piece of it. And yeah, building out a predictive platform. I think it's as simple as thinking just about Lyft, right? We're going to have a fleet of these robots on the farm. So how do you sit there and manage the systems? What kind of algorithms do you put in place so that the carry doesn't go to someone who actually might only be 100 feet away, but goes to the person who's like, 1,000 feet away, right? And optimize for that. So, Lyft has done it, Uber has done it. So there's no question we can do it too, but it will be the first time we're really doing it in a farm context.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And so how the product specifically, like how many of these rovers and wheelbarrows would a farm need to be equipped with to be efficient or maximum efficiency, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it will depend. It depends per farm, because when I've asked farms this, like, what's the average size? So market data tells us the average table grape farm is 400 acres. When I ask a farm, they're like, it's all over the place. It could be 80 acres, it could be 1,000 acres. So we're sort of using this metric of an average of six robots, and then in addition to smart wheelbarrows for that few 100-acre farm.
Oh, awesome. And so I assume that in the long run, the value proposition is that you'll be reducing the time it takes to harvest and increasing efficiency impact over time. Like, what kind of metrics are you using to measure that that type of success?
So we measure production efficiency in terms of like more boxes picked. So so when we did some just like really, looked at data, we saw that, okay, day one, it was 28%, day two, it was 40%. So that's why we kind of say 30 to 40%. Humans aren't robots. So I think, we have to be really careful, right? Because we shouldn't say that's the whole point. That's the only point of this, right? I think production efficiency is important, but the second really piece of this is, and the metric, right, is just more yield at the end of the day. The second metric that we look at is around farm worker ease, right? And these ergonomics, right? And how are we creating things that, full autonomy will never exist on a farm. Hopefully, yes, I will say that full autonomy will never exist at a farm, no matter how some people like to think about it. And so this sort of human robot collaboration, I think, is really important. So we think really deeply about what that means for us in the future. So that's not maybe a quantitative metric. It's like around injuries, I think, and but I think there's also the, hey, is this just easier? Like, are you just not sweating bullets and, need to take 4,000 breaks or whatever it is, right?
Right. Like
Yes.
you've touched on that a little bit about like the experience of the farm worker and on as they're doing the job, and how this product is going to impact that. And it sounds like you've really thought about that experience to develop the product overall. And are there specific features that came up that you're adding to the product based on that experience, that you can speak to?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think the product itself, by saying you don't have to spend 2 hours of your time hauling, 200-pound wheelbarrows around the farm, is specifically, that's the first
Hmm.
step of it. So which is really interesting in the field of robotics. People never talk about the humans, right? And I think like we just like you're always going to have we today have humans with robotics. Like not everything is a Roomba that can just like go around a house, right? But you still need to pick up the Roomba and charge it, right? And so sort of
Right.
this connection between humanism and technology, I think sometimes lacks in the conversation around robotics or even AI and things like that. um but overall, right, I think, everyone likes to use future of right things, right? So future of the farm, future of the farm worker. I think it's a conversation that we're eager to be involved in meaningful ways. And I think maybe this is a segue to the community piece, if that's okay,
Hmm.
Andy. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
one of the things that we were thinking about, right, in terms of farm workers, right, what does it mean for their kids, right, who, hired an organizer and activist, Olympia Blanco, to really think about what would community engagement and skill building mean for these communities, because she really bluntly said, like, people like you, Suma, will never move to Fresno. And I was like, yeah, I guess I think so. I don't really know too much about Fresno, but then when I talk to people in California, they're like, "Oh, Fresno." So, I don't know,
Right.
right? Whatever that elitism is that a lot of us, right, in urban centers, rightly, wrong or wrongly have, right? So,
Right.
so thinking about what does it mean for equipping people with the education, the tools, the skills, to run this equipment? What would it mean if they own the equipment and then leased it? And then are there ways in which, actual ownership of lands could happen, right, by enabling farming in an easier way, and kind of opening up,
Hmm.
farming to more and more types of communities, than we see today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great impact. I think it's an entire industry too around worker safety and
Mm.
what the future of worker safety is going to be. I know that I've heard a lot of reports this year, of just extreme weather causing um, uh, very dangerous environments for our agricultural workers, to be, you know, even death at some point. So I know that it's on a very heated topic right now, and it's really interesting. What I loved about the conversation that you and I had prior to this was just how you're using some of that experience of the actual agricultural worker to impact the design of the product overall. And I love that humanity that you're adding to something like robotics. Like you just said, people often disregard that human experience when they're building robotics. And to me, that's what makes this product so strong and really, I think, it's super exciting for me as well, to
Yeah.
see where it's going to go. I think it's really awesome, that you're kind of thinking about the whole ecosystem and not just the product itself. I'm going to pause again and see if we have any questions coming in from the audience. Doug actually asked if there's like right now you're just focused on table grapes, but
Mm.
what are some of the other produce or products that you'll be moving into?
Yeah. I would love for this to kind of become sort of a full vineyard and orchard automation solution. So
Oh,
I
awesome.
think you know, starting with table grapes, moving to berries. A lot of table grape farms also grow stone fruits, so peaches, things like
Hmm.
that. So thinking about what it could mean for peaches, things of that nature. So specialty crops, right? I think as a whole is our market, but definitely thinking about other delicious fruits.
Yeah, absolutely. So where are you at in the development of the product and the company itself?
Yeah. So the first prototype is the one that you can see on the website. We learned a lot from that, of what to do and what not to do. And so we're actually doing a complete, not a complete, but like a bold sort of redesign that includes the Smart Wheelbarrow. And so we'll be testing that. So our first demos of that iteration, early stage iteration, October and November of this year, which is really still during harvest season. So those will be kind of the first couple of units. And then I think a full pilot, something that is closer to what we would commercialize at the end of next year.
Awesome. I was just going to ask that question on does harvest season really impact the way that you're able to test and develop the products and market?
Yeah, I think it does. It does and it doesn't, right? I think there's sort of this engineering validation that happens, right? Can something, you know, can the Smart Wheelbarrow detect that it's 150 pounds? So we can put sandbags on it, right? And just be like, okay, it's weighing it. Can the robot travel autonomously from point A to B based on that load detection? Great, we don't need grapes for that. But you know, as you know, many of us, right, who design products know, you know, testing it with users is really the best thing. And so in that sense, um, you know, the being able to test things like what are the efficiency increases, the farm workers like feel that it seamlessly integrates into their existing operations, which is incredibly important. We're not trying to create the smart farm of the future today, right? This is an iterative
Mhm.
process. Um, so I think we can get a lot done, not during harvest season, but harvest season is really important for full testing.
Yeah, I imagine that's really fantastic to hear. And hardware is such historically it takes a long time to create
Yeah.
hardware products due to the supply chain and the manufacturing capabilities. And so how have you found that creating an agricultural product is what is that experience like? Are you finding some of the same um, facing some of the same hurdles that you faced in building other types of hardware devices, or is it seem a little bit easier because there's a larger manufacturing chain that pre-exists for farming equipment? So what has that experience been like?
Yeah. I think the development challenges are similar, right? In the sense that you're contending with having to deal with, okay, I ordered something. Is it going to take 2 weeks? It's going to be 3 weeks. At this prototype stage, you know, supply chain isn't an issue at all, to be frank,
Mhm.
in the way that more mature companies, right, have been really impacted, for example, by the semiconductor shortage. But we can foresee those types of challenges. So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's similar, right? Like building a product means you have to order things, you have to build things, you have to test things in real time, things melt, and then be like, oh, maybe we shouldn't 3D, maybe we shouldn't 3D print this, right? And then you kind of go from there, while you're also doing all the software testing, right? Because you know,
Right.
as you know, right, no hardware exists in a vacuum. Software is everything, right? And we're building a really robust software and AI platform as well. So you're just kind of tackling both at the same time. I think the other thing with, you know, hardware, hard tech is investors, and I think
Mhm.
it's really been actually pretty interesting to me. almost every investor I'm speaking to, like they're open to conversing. Um, so, but in general, investors, right, rightfully, I think for some of their limited partners and things like that, don't want to take hardware risk because of the longer timelines, because of taking on supply chain risk, manufacturing risk. So definitely understand where their concerns are. I think, my point of view
Mhm.
personally would be from an impact perspective and a societal perspective. We're not going to solve everything through like SaaS products, right?
Right.
And I don't mean to be like saying that like an asshole, but like so I think meeting more and more investors who have an appetite um, to either like lean into that expertise, right, and say like, yeah, we're going to take on hardware risk. um, I think one thing I found really interesting is that in the investor landscape, you have um, people who are really interested in robotics and AI, and they're investing in those thematic areas. And then they're like, agriculture. Like agriculture is seen as the last frontier for robotics and AI in many circles. And so
Right.
AWS, for example, Amazon Web Services, they accepted us into their first sort of flagship program for robotics acceleration, because they're like, we're doing this stuff in warehouses, and we
Right.
know the same types of platforms and simulations can be done for you guys, right? And so we're seeing those kind of interests. And then on the ag side, we're seeing like they're really used to sort of old scale, a little bit more old school ways in which we think about agriculture. And so then it's really it's an education on, hey, this is what robotics is, this is what AI is, like this is where we think applicability is, and seeing the fit there. So I think it's interesting. I think I'm really excited, to be in a position where one never feels like an expert, right? But like just being able to talk through these things, and then with
Mhm.
like consumers as well, right? Because I think at the end of the day, the more we know how things are actually made and built, I think we'll be more empowered to make decisions around, not just organic and local, but like sustainable, responsible, right, farming, or anything else,
Right.
right,
Well,
across
that's a
that.
question. Like, how do you see the product really impacting kind of sustainable farming and kind of Callie asked this question, like a clean agriculture or more sustainable, environmentally friendly agriculture.
Agriculture. Yeah. I think there's the short-term answer and the long-term answer. So I think in the short term, I really like to phrase it as mitigating land and climate impacts rather than
Hmm.
solving, right? So mitigating to me means like with our first product in the current iteration, it's really around, okay, the climate's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. So how are we creating tools to make the workforce, like enable the workforce to actually, you know, feel more comfortable doing the work or perform the work? How are we building a machine that's, an electric, right? Low emissions, no emissions type of vehicle. So it doesn't um, add to environmental damage on the land, right? So I think that's the mitigation perspective. The long term, and I think this is the really interesting stuff, is how do we use data and analytics to sit there and say, okay, we are measuring things like crop health and quality. We're looking at disease detection. We're looking at pest damage, and we are able to sit there and be able to recommend, hey, only dose this much like pesticide right here, don't do like a full spray, but
Hmm.
like that precision dosing and that precision agriculture. So that's sort of the longer term vision, is sort of boiling in these metrics to be proactive, right, versus where we are now, which is kind of mitigating.
Yeah, I love this vision. It sounds like you're really starting with this companion carry product, but you have a real a true vision of what an entire suite of products and solutions would be for a farm. and you're already starting to think how you're putting those products together to provide that solution for a farm and the agricultural workers. That's amazing to me that you're already thinking in that big picture way.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. We're coming towards the end of our conversation. It's always great to connect with you, and I could talk to you for hours. You know, we often get on the phone and do, but how you know, before we move into wrapping up, I'm gonna pause again and see if there's any questions from the audience. I'm super fascinated by the conversation today. I think that you're moving into a market that is really interesting, and like you said, one of the last frontiers for technology to take hold of. And I know it can be I imagine that the conversations are starting to turn. And I'm from Texas originally, so, and my father is from South Texas, and so I was exposed to a lot of the agricultural ecosystem from him in a very limited way. But he always talks about, you know, all these, like, he's always been really rough around technology, and he turned 80 and he's actually watching YouTube of I forget what they're called, the farm boys or something, and he's fascinated by all of the agricultural equipment and technology that they're using to farm. And I think it's just so interesting to see how, you know, an 80-year-old man who has been always very anti-technology is watching YouTube videos and fascinated and learning from about these technologies. So I'm, you know, my last question to you is kind of like, what has that experience been like working in agriculture? And kind of, you know, we could have done the whole conversation on that. I know, but just quickly, you know, what has that experience been like, and how are you kind of navigating that?
Yeah, I think the positive thing is, right, it's kind of an incredible experience for those of us who haven't grown up on farms. You know, of course, like, grandparents were farmers, right? I think all of us, as many of us as immigrants, they're, whether how many generations long, right, have that experience, or some of you guys might be from, you know, Midwest, California. But I didn't grow up on a farm. And so it was an incredible experience just to see how we grow our food and really learn about that value chain and all the steps around, you know, pruning and spraying and weeding and harvesting and transfer, right? And, like, you kind of just learn. So it's just been an incredible learning experience. I think the other facet of it, and, you know, like, let's just name it, right? It is all white men, right? Literally, robotics and agriculture, I probably picked two of the most white male dominated professions alive, right? And there's a lot of history there and context and things like that. So, you know, one of my secret missions, obviously, is to get, you know, more diversity, you know, and equity in these spaces, because I'd love more voices to think about how do we, you know, how does robotics shape our food systems, right? How does and AI shape, right, food systems and agriculture and our climate in different ways? Like, what are the communities that are the most impacted? And maybe because you're from those communities, right, you have a specific viewpoint that you can bring into those of us who are more on the technology side. And so, yeah, would love, you know, and I think with you, Andy, like, just continuing to try to figure out how to connect those dots and create more opportunities. I think we're going to see a lot more BIPOC owned land in the future, given some policies that are out there and incentives. And I'd love to figure out, like, how to be a part of that conversation, right, and that solution. So, yeah, I think it's been interesting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Suma. To end the conversation, I just have, you know, the conversation has been so great, and I've gained so much information about what you're doing, Future Acres. I'm super excited by the product you're building. I'm going to put the website in the chat for everybody to check out. I encourage you to check out futureacres.co and learn about what they're doing. I know that you have a campaign, a fundraising campaign going on right now. So why don't you quickly tell everybody about that?
Yeah. I can't believe I forgot that. That's like my one job is to like bring in money. Oh, I'm like the worst CEO ever. So sorry. I need to be like, I want money, everyone. So yeah,
Right.
we launched a seed invest equity crowdfunding campaign. So equity crowdfunding is when folks like you and I can invest, and our minimum, sort of investment right now is $1,000. So we launched the campaign. We're raising $3 million. Actually, as of yesterday, we hit $1 million. And we're planning, which is super exciting. So I'm going to pause for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, when are we going to hit $1 million? Like I've been waiting for this for a few weeks. And so I think we have a few more weeks to go for this campaign, and would just love to, have your support to build this vision. I think equity crowdfunding is a way we can democratize investment into a lot of spaces, including ones like this. So yeah, I'd love for you guys to kind of join the team in that way.
Awesome. And I will send out a link as well after the event to all of this information as well. And then finally, what's one good thing that's happened to you recently?
Yeah, definitely raising $1 million. I was
Right.
very stressed out about that. And then I started teaching. So I teach
Oh,
grad
awesome.
students at the School of Visual Arts. I'm teaching a class called Entrepreneurship for Sustainability and Resilience. But sort of the byline there is really the future of food and climate, and entrepreneurship as activism. And so thinking really deeply about how we build not only responsible innovation, but how do we center our innovations around justice? And so love to bring in speakers for the class. It's 14 weeks. 2 weeks are down at this point. So yeah, that's been really exciting. Like it's a new kind of experience for me to teach. And it's been honestly like just a dream come true to be able
That's
to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on everything, and wishing you all the best success in the future. How can people stay connected to you?
Yeah, I'll throw my email in. So anyone who wants to get in touch. I'm also very easy to find on LinkedIn. If you just don't mind like putting like a little note in, but there's my email. I should be one of the only Suma Reddy. So I'm easy to find, I promise. Yeah, always happy to chat.
Yeah, and anything else that you want to leave the audience with? Audience, last chance to ask any questions. Asuma, feel free to just chime in and ask any questions. The conversation was really enjoyable. I really love the product that you're building, and just everything that you've accomplished today and that you're going to continue to accomplish. We didn't even touch on your community activism and how we even met through queer activism. So that's a whole nother conversation we'll have to figure out.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with before we sign off?
No, I think just a huge thank you to everyone who's listening, and appreciate your ear, and hopefully kind of keep in touch if you can, and invest. Yeah, if you're interested, or just like ping me if you want to learn more or interested in getting into this space. We need more of all of you who are here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Suma, and thank you everyone for participating today. That wraps up our September Founder Summit, and we hope to see you at our next events, beginning with next Tuesday, a conversation around IP and copyright. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
We stopped recording.